So we're back on the record. As we left for lunch, the parties were discussing whether to agree to allow the state to go out of order and call a rebuttal witness now. May I trust there's been an agreement?
I believe so, Your Honor. We do, Your Honor.
Okay. So no objection to Dr. Knoll testifying now and rebuttal to Dr. Johnson?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. State will call Dr. Knoll.
Sir, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear you testify to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Kindly have a seat there. I know you watched the other testimony. You know where to be.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, could you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Actually, one more thing, just to tie up everything. Do you call this witness recognizing it's without prejudice to the defendant's right to renew his Rule 29 motion?
Yes, Your Honor.
Small thing, but right. Pardon me, sir.
James Knoll, spelled K-N-O-L-L.
Are you employed, sir?
Yes, I am.
With whom?
I am employed by SUNY Upstate Medical University and the Central New York Psychiatric Center in New York.
In what capacity?
I'm the Director of Forensic Psychiatry. I'm also the Director of the Forensic Psychiatry Training Program, and I'm a Professor of Psychiatry at SUNY Upstate.
And sir, do you hold any, why don't you give the court your educational background first?
Sure. I obtained my medical degree from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas. I also completed my psychiatry residency training at the same institution. I then went on to do a complete and graduate from a forensic psychiatry fellowship here actually at Case Western Reserve. And I'm board certified in both adult and forensic psychiatry.
And sir, what was your undergraduate degree in?
It was in psychology.
Okay. And sir, are you licensed in any states as a psychiatrist?
Yes, I'm licensed to practice medicine in the state of New York.
And sir, could you tell the court the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist?
Well, briefly, a psychiatrist is an MD medical doctor, so someone who's gone to medical school, graduated from medical school, and then subspecialized in the discipline of psychiatry, which is a branch of medicine. And psychiatrists are, most people know the difference because psychiatrists can prescribe medicine usually, whereas psychologists can't. Psychiatrists can also perform various medical procedures and often by statute have the authority and privilege of civilly committing, whereas many times psychologists aren't.
And you mentioned that you had to stay in Cleveland previously. What was that about?
Yes, so that was during my forensic psychiatry fellowship training at Case Western with Dr. Philip Resnick, and then the year after that I stayed on with him to help him teach in his program and work at North Coast Behavioral Health Care System here in the area, and I also was an independent court-appointed evaluator here at the Justice Center.
So how many years did you work with Dr. Resnick?
Approximately 2 years.
And sir, what did you do when you were here with Dr. Resnick?
In addition to fulfilling the requirements of his training program, we would work here at the Justice Center performing a variety of forensic evaluations, such as competence to stand trial, insanity evaluations, psychological mitigation of penalty, and mental state at the time of the offense.
So have you testified before, sir?
Many times.
In that capacity?
Yes.
And sir, have you had experience regarding interviewing charged defendants in various circumstances?
Yes, I have.
And could you explain to the court that experience?
Well, as a forensic evaluator for the courts, and this is in my criminal capacity, I've done both criminal and civil work. In the criminal realm, I've done hundreds of evaluations of defendants' mental state for various purposes. and have been employed equally by both the prosecution and defense.
Okay. Have you ever testified before regarding mental states of individuals who've been charged with murder?
Yes, I have.
And have you testified about your findings regarding those particular cases?
Correct.
So, sir, you have experience regarding the evaluation of psychological evaluations of defendants who are charged with serious crimes.
That's correct.
And, sir, how did you get involved in this case?
I was contacted by you and your office directly.
And what was the request from me?
The request was to review the conclusions and the reliability of the report by Dr. Johnson that you provided with me, along with all the other supplemental information and materials that went along with this case.
And I want to get to that, sir. You did provide an opinion regarding that, did you not?
Yes, sir, I did.
May I question?
Sure. Ms. Barnhill, can you email me a copy of that right now?
Of course.
Thank you. Actually, I forgot. For some reason this email's not working. Let me give it one more
I've
time.
done that as a joke. Or I can print a copy for you.
No, that's okay. I gather you're going to have some of this displayed on the screen like the past ones. Well, I mean, I'm listening, but
I guess, yeah, could. That'd be a good idea.
Thank you.
I'm going to show it's been marked State Exhibit 1251. We have Ms. Barnhill.
Yes, this is the report.
Wait a second, you got to wait for technical.
well, he has it in front of him.
Okay, what is that?
This is the report that I submitted to you in your office.
March 14 of this year?
March 15th of this year. Your Honor.
Pardon me.
And sir, based upon your qualifications in your previous capacities, did you have an opportunity to review Dr. Johnson's reports?
Yes, I did.
And after reviewing Dr. Johnson's report, did you have certain opinions that you then were able to express?
Yes.
But before we get into that, sir, I'd like to take you to page 1 of the report. And sir, what did you review before you made your opinions regarding Dr. Johnson's reports?
Essentially, all of the listed, numerically listed sources of information I have there that you're displaying, the entire criminal investigation of the case, all of the numerous video interviews, transcribed interviews, and reports from various experts, in addition to Dr. Johnson's report.
And specifically, you reviewed the video and transcribed statement of Officer Cibola, correct?
That's correct.
And you also were able to review the statement of Lieutenant Ketterer, correct?
Yes.
And you listed that in your review. Is that
Yes,
correct?
I did.
And, sir, would it be fair to say from pages 2 through 4, pages 2 and 3, you kind of summarize briefly the facts of the case, the significant facts that pertain to your report?
That's correct.
And, sir, then you also state on page 4 that you summarized Dr. Johnson's report, correct?
Correct.
All right. And so let's talk first about disassociation and amnesia. Briefly describe to the court what we're talking about, because I know the court listened to Dr. Johnson. I don't want to be too repetitive here.
Sure. So, to cut to the chase, in terms of dissociation, it is, many people view it as an adaptational response to extreme stress. It's how people handle the overwhelming experience of the stress. So they'll protect themselves from it in some way, in addition to the fight or flight response and the psychophysiological response that Dr. Johnson described earlier. It is how people also psychologically protect themselves from a traumatic event. And so it can come in many forms, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, such as the sense of time slowing down, the sense of having tunnel vision, the sense of seeing things played out as though it were in a movie, and the sense of things being detached from things.
But that's common when pretty common when people experience some high-stress situations, correct?
In fact, the research of critical incident police shootings suggests that it's the normative response.
So it's nothing unusual.
Absolutely not.
But it's, correct me if I'm wrong, is it not, how should I say, unique to each individual's perceptions that equates what their disassociation is?
Correct. So each individual is going to bring his or her own particular mindset, psychology, coping strengths, vulnerabilities, and other factors to that stress response.
How does that relate to amnesia?
So amnesia, specifically dissociative amnesia, is the loss of memory for a particularly traumatic event. This is another dissociative response. The natural progression of it is that over time, and usually with cues, the individual is able to regain those memories.
Okay. Is amnesia the same as memory loss?
It's in the continuum in that there are different types of memory loss and different types of amnesia. And so one can have memory loss from a number of different things. For example, most people think of memory loss in the context of Alzheimer's, dementia, where it's progressive and gets worse. In the case of dissociative amnesia that we're talking about here, we're talking about a localized experience that is circumscribed to a traumatic event, and that over time can revert and come back to the individual.
So those are not interchangeable then. They're separate concepts.
Correct.
And what can cause amnesia?
Well, may I interrupt?
Sure.
When you hear him say amnesia, do you hear dissociative amnesia, or do you hear the broad term amnesia? Or maybe I'm asking this. Are there kinds of amnesia besides dissociative amnesia?
Yes, Your Honor, there are.
So what are you hearing him say?
I'm hearing him say dissociative amnesia.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Pardon my interruption.
So, sir, you've heard the term malingering within the context of a criminal forensic evaluation,
Correct.
and define what that is for the court.
Well, malingering is simply the false or grossly exaggerated production of symptoms for the purpose of some external gain. And it's usually either to avoid pain or seek pleasure. In the case of in the criminal context, it's often to avoid pain, which means avoiding punishment or avoiding sentence.
Okay. And in your experience, by the way, there have been studies regarding, in the forensic criminal evaluation context, the percentages of individuals who claim this malingering?
Yes.
Well, can I interrupt?
Sure.
Would anybody ever claim malingering here? I think I know what you mean.
I misspoke, Your Honor.
Is there a known percentage of people claiming symptoms who are found to be malingering?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is that your question?
Yes.
What's the answer?
So to back up just a little bit, there is good research showing that of all violent offenders, approximately 30 to 40% claim loss of memory for the offense. So it's not uncommon at all. Of those people claiming loss of memory for the violent offense, approximately 20% have been found to be malingering.
And in your own experiences here, under Dr. Resnick, did you in fact experience these kind of occurrences?
Quite regularly, that's what the training was geared towards, was to how to screen and detect and test for a malingered mental illness.
Well, then how do you do that?
It is we call it a multi-modal or multi-approach process that involves both reviewing all of the records, interviewing the individual face-to-face, and, if necessary, administering them specific tests designed to augment our ability to detect malingering.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And then putting all this into context and trying to understand if there are any internal and external inconsistencies in the individual's report of symptoms.
Well, you were in the back of the courtroom this morning hearing Dr. Johnson, correct?
Yes.
And did he not indicate that interviewing the individual is not necessary?
Yes, I heard him say that.
And what would your opinion be on that?
I couldn't more strongly disagree.
Why?
Well, it's a standard part of the forensic evaluation, and it's critical to do because of the individual variability in how people respond and experience different types of mental illness. So just as he acknowledged, Dr. Johnson did, that people can have differences in how they experience stress response. That's why it's important to go in and sit down and delineate and elucidate the details from that specific individual to get as accurate as possible. It's also important to be able to meet face-to-face because in the case of someone who is alleging a certain type of symptom, or in this case memory loss, one needs to be able to test their memory and delineate the precise edges of what they're claiming their loss of memory is. And then finally, it's critical to do this in the case of someone claiming a focal amnesia that's related to the moment of the offense. And why is that? It's because of the association in the literature with malingering. And in this particular case, it's my understanding that there were conflicting reports about the timing of the amnesia, which in my opinion should raise red flags about going in and investigating and being certain about the genuineness of the amnesia.
And sir, when somebody has genuine dissociative amnesia, will that later be able to be, will that person somehow later on be able to remember the events?
That's usually the case. That's the usual course of events, is that, in fact, going back to this police study I mentioned earlier, it was a study of 115 officers involved in critical incident shooting, 90% of which experienced some form of dissociative symptoms. A minority experienced memory loss, but none experienced irrevocable, continuous memory loss that they never, in other words, they never regained the memories. None of them had that.
And sir, let's talk about on page 8, your impaired volitional control. What are you talking about there?
Here I'm specifically referring to Dr. Johnson's opinion in his report, where he concludes that Officer Brelo's fear and stress-related dissociation caused him to be compelled and have an inability or an impaired ability to regulate or control his use of force. And so this, in my opinion, brings up the issue of volitional control and ability to control one's behavior.
Well, what does that mean?
Well, It means that one steps into very murky waters. Assessments of volitional control are arguably the most difficult types of evaluations there are in all of mental health. And the reason is because forensic mental health, we are still not yet at the point where we can, it is easy for us to distinguish between an irresistible impulse and an impulse simply not resisted. Or in this case, to extrapolate to this case, uncontrollable behavior as opposed to merely reckless behavior. To be able to make that distinction requires a great deal of rigor and scrutiny.
Not just looking at somebody's statement on video and reading the transcript to get to that particular opinion?
I think doing so and forming opinions in that way is a significant limitation that one must concede either in testimony or in one's report.
Well, you heard Dr. Johnson today. He didn't concede that point, correct?
Correct.
So in his opinion, he didn't really need to interview Officer Brelo to make his conclusions.
Correct, although my understanding from hearing his testimony today was that when asked about whether he had considered malingering, I believe he said that he simply wasn't here to do that.
Well, wouldn't that be an important part of the evaluation of Officer Brelo's mindset at the time of the incident and then after?
I think it's pinnacle, and it's at the crux of matters. In the case of evaluating someone's mental state where they're claiming a focal amnesia for the precise time of the crime.
And sir, what would you want done to be able to opine on Officer Brelo's mental state? What would you want to do?
In addition to all of the records that we reviewed, that both of us reviewed, a personal face-to-face evaluation is going to be critical to elucidate details that may not be present in the record, but that need to be considered. It may lead to other questions that need to be asked or collateral that needs to be gathered. In addition, other psychiatric and medical reasons for memory loss or loss of control of behavior need to be considered and investigated. That too requires a personal evaluation. And then in terms of considering and effectively ruling out malingering, one would need to do a personal evaluation and administer certain tests designed to detect malingered memory.
Did you request anything of me?
Yes.
And what was that?
I requested if it was possible that I be allowed to evaluate personally Officer Brelo.
And I'm going to...
One moment, please, before we...
Sure.
Doctor, you were not able to evaluate Officer Brelo face-to-face, correct?
That's objection.
How about if we ask it this way? Did you meet with the defendant?
No, Your Honor, I did not.
Is that non-objectionable to you as far as you're concerned? Well, I mean, if it is, protect your record and say that it is, but, objection. Okay. This is something I hadn't considered, especially since I hadn't seen his meaning Dr. Noll's report. But Dr. Johnson effectively testified to what the defendant's mental state was. I thought he was going to testify to what it could be given the human mind and the human body and their interactions. But for example, in his report, he says, and this is just one thing, Officer Brelo's attention and concentration were primed, etc. So on. He says his reactions were compelled by a mindset. I mean, I think in the ordinary case, let's say he were claiming a lack of competency, I think he would be required, but correct me if I'm wrong, to produce himself for an evaluation by his opponent, right?
If you were claiming... Judge, I'll withdraw the question, okay, so we can move on.
All right.
And so then we can just move on to the pertinent parts here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Your Honor.
But by the way, like I said, I haven't seen this report. If you consider one of the pertinent parts to be asking this witness, does the defendant remember or not remember this incident, I would not ask that. You can't waste the last 4 weeks of our lives.
And I wouldn't, Judge. That's not one of the questions I'm going to do.
Or is he, basically, if you ask, is he telling the truth?
Oh, no.
Then you will have wasted our time.
Oh, yes, no, Judge, that's not our purview. You're the trier of fact, Your Honor.
Well, I don't say that out of defending my prerogative. I say that out of trying to avoid error.
Right, Judge. Sir, but as you said, let's just get to the meat of the matter. On page 10, you offer your opinions, correct?
Yes.
And there's 3 of them, correct?
Correct.
So we'll go through them, okay? Could you state your opinion? And by the way, are your opinions to the reasonable degree of medical certainty, sir?
Yes, I give all my opinions in a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
And could you state your opinion for the court right now, sir?
Sure. It's my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that there are important limitations in Dr. Johnson's report that cause its conclusions to be unreliable.
And you have 3 reasons why.
Yes.
The first reason?
Primarily the lack of a personal evaluation of Officer Brelo. This is because evaluating a defendant personally is important for reliably determining mental state at the time of an offense and excluding alternative explanations for a defendant's actions. Individuals may show variability in their reactions and emotions and motivations under stress, and a personal evaluation is necessary to elucidate these details.
Would that personal evaluation help you determine whether the individual was malingering or not?
Yes, it would.
And what's your second opinion, sir?
That Dr. Johnson didn't administer any formal tests of Officer Brelo's memory, given that he had claimed an impairment of memory, to determine the reliability of that claim of memory loss. And this is because there are certain patterns of memory loss or amnesia can help distinguish genuine from fake amnesia. And most cases of amnesia over time resolve, allowing you to then go in and clarify and elucidate details.
Well, sir, in this particular case, there is facts and evidence indicating that Officer Brelo indicated to 2 individuals relatively quickly after the time of the incident that he was on the hood of the Malibu. Based upon your training and experience, do individuals have a better memory after the time of a stressful event? Or are they such a disassociative mindset that they're not going to remember? Or is it later on that they have a better memory?
So it's my experience that it's highly variable to the individual. there may be some individuals who experience a high stress event, and in fact, their memory, and I'm acknowledging controversy in the field here over memory here. It's possible that some, in the context of a high stress incident, their memories will be more vivid than others, more specific and detailed because they're hyper-focused. On the other hand, some individuals, it's individual specific. Some individuals will have a period of localized amnesia or patchy amnesia, but that over time comes back to them, and especially when given clues about, don't you remember this, and don't you remember the color of that, and then the memories will come back to them.
Based upon your training experience, sir, and your knowledge in this area, could somebody be able to have amnesia later on after a stressful event? And they remember it and then they don't remember it?
That would be atypical and would, in my opinion, be a red flag for needing to go in and do a personal evaluation and assess for feigned amnesia.
And in this particular situation, we do have indication from two outside sources, Sobolik and Ketterer. You've reviewed their statements, correct?
Correct.
Regarding Officer Brelo's statements, correct?
Correct.
So would you factor those particular statements into your evaluation of whether there in fact was this dissociative amnesia?
In my opinion, you'd have to.
And again, well, you tell me how that would factor in.
Well, in and of itself, it suggests that there's reason there to go and dig deeper and get more facts and elucidate more details.
And how do you dig deeper?
You end up having to do a personal evaluation with the individual and see if they can be confronted with the inconsistencies.
So seeing a video and reading transcripts of that individual statement isn't enough?
Not in my opinion.
Seeing his emotions on the screen and how he reacts, that wouldn't be enough?
It's important data, but it's not enough in my opinion.
All right, sir, and finally, your third and final opinion, sir?
Is that I didn't see where Dr. Johnson ruled out any alternative explanations, such as malingering that we're talking about here, although there are other explanations for memory loss, medical and psychiatric explanations. I didn't see any of those ruled out either. But in the case of Officer Brelo, I didn't see anywhere in Dr. Johnson's report where he attended to this. And in the context of a criminal evaluation of mental state, it's standard practice to consider malingering.
And are you not opining on this particular issue regarding Officer Brelo, correct?
Correct.
Because you don't have enough information.
That's correct.
And sir, did you have an opinion regarding Dr. Johnson's conclusion that Officer Brelo's anatomic nervous system arousal contraindicates sudden passion or rage?
Yes.
And what is your opinion on that?
I disagreed with it. I found it unreliable. The reason that I found it unreliable is that stress and dissociation, as we mentioned, is the norm. It's normative among officers in critical incident shooting. So in other words, it's very common. And most are able to recall, most are able to control their behavior, and there's no evidence that experiencing a fight or flight syndrome precludes one from also having other emotions and motivations.
So, Dr. Johnson even acknowledges in his report that Officer Brelo could have been angry as well as fearful.
And that's precisely the point that I'm getting at. That, and I think that is, I agree with him on that point. It is possible for someone to experience fight or flight and also be angry at the same time.
So one's not exclusive of the other, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
And sir, you also opined on the conclusion that Dr. Johnson said that Officer Brelo's fear and stress-related disassociation caused him to be compelled and to have an impaired ability to regulate or control his use of force?
Yes.
Tell the court why you disagree with that particular conclusion by Dr. Johnson.
I disagree with that because it is given in a conclusory manner, in my opinion. In other words, there's no supporting bases or forensic behavioral evidence to support the opinion that he lacked volitional control over his behavior. And as we mentioned earlier, this is one of the most difficult determinations in all of forensic psychiatry, and so it deserves enhanced rigor and enhanced scrutiny because it's a fine line. How do you tell the difference between dusk and twilight? How do you tell the difference between that which is uncontrollable and that which was simply not controlled? All I saw was an assertion that this was so because of acute stress, but I didn't see any explication or support of his reasoning here.
So, sir, in your opinion, based upon the degree of medical certainty, would have been necessary to actually interview Officer Brelo to be able to get a reliable as well as a thorough understanding to opine on his mindset at the time of this incident?
Yes, that's my opinion.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Do you have any cross-exam, Mr. Mann?
I do, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. No.
Afternoon, Counselor.
Dr. Johnson, did you hear when he testified that his area of expertise was brain studies and research of the brain under high stress?
Yes.
Okay. Is that also your area of expertise?
No, that's not my specific area of expertise.
Okay. What is your area of expertise?
I have a number of broad areas, but I would say that one of them that's most pertinent here is the forensic psychiatric evaluation of a person's mental state at the time of the offense, and also the detection of malingered mental illness.
Okay. Well, let's get something out of the way right now. You cannot say with a degree of medical or scientific certainty that Officer Brelo malingered in this case. Is that correct?
Not only am I saying that, I'm saying that no one else can say it either.
Well, it's a fair answer, but
I don't want to interrupt, but I hope that he answers the questions well, Your Honor.
I think that what he's driving at is if he asked you a question that may be answered in one word, that word being either yes or either no, say so. If it can't be, just say, I can't give you a one-word answer, something like that.
Yes, Your Honor.
Pardon my interruption.
I didn't hear your answer. Can you say with a degree of medical or scientific certainty that Officer Brelo malingered in this case?
No.
Okay. How many police officer shooting cases have you been involved in personally with the capacity as a psychiatrist?
In terms of forensic evaluations, approximately a dozen. In terms of treatment evaluations, 2 or 3 dozen.
So you have treated police officers in the past regarding malingering-related issues?
No, I thought you meant shooting incidents.
Okay. Have you ever treated any police officers that suffered from dissociative amnesia? Let me start there.
Yes.
Okay. And how many?
There would be approximately 1 to 2 dozen.
1 to 2 dozen? And when was the last time that you had that kind of treatment that you had in the past?
It would be sometime in the past 6 months.
Have you ever been involved in a case with these kinds of circumstances?
No.
Okay. And the last officer that you evaluated 6 months ago, what did that case involve?
This case involved an officer that was involved in a critical incident shooting and ended up having to shoot and kill a mentally ill suspect. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. What was your involvement?
My involvement was evaluating the officer's mental state at the time and advising the court.
And how did you become involved in that case?
I was contacted by a local county DA's office.
This officer?
No, this was in New York.
New York. Okay. What is malingering?
So malingering is the conscious, intentional production of false or grossly exaggerated symptoms of mental illness for the purpose of some external incentive.
Okay. And in the context of criminal, you define that, right? In the context of criminal cases, for people sitting in Officer Brelo's position, you defined what that benefit would be, which is what?
It's usually to either avoid punishment or reduce one's punishment.
Okay. You watched Officer Brelo's interview, correct?
Yes.
And did you come to realize that he admitted to being involved in this officer-involved shooting?
I did.
Did you realize that he admitted to shooting at the suspect vehicle?
Yes, I did.
And you're aware that he admitted to being on zone car 238 shooting inside the suspect vehicle?
Correct.
And you realize that there was no prosecution of Officer Brelo until much later. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
So he never denied being involved in the shooting in this case, is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me ask you if you agree with the following facts as being stressful in nature and traumatic. Learning that a fellow police officer has been shot at. You agree with that can be traumatic for an officer?
Of course.
Okay. Becoming involved in the pursuit in which the suspects are observed to have guns. Can that be traumatic?
Sure.
Okay. Being involved in the pursuit where the suspects are pointing guns at your fellow officers. You agree that that's traumatic?
No doubt.
Okay. And involved in a pursuit where a suspect vehicle is ramming other police cars.
Yes.
Arriving at a scene where you hear gunshots, radio transmissions that they're gunshots. You agree that that can be traumatic for an officer?
I do agree.
Okay. And actually hearing those gunshots as well. That's traumatic as well. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. And you know from your review of the evidence that 12 other officers were involved in shooting in this case. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how about watching, as in this case, a suspect vehicle come barreling towards your police car and has not stopped after all the shooting has gone on? You agree that that can be pretty traumatizing for an officer?
Yes.
Objection.
You agree that those kinds of facts can lead to dissociative amnesia, as you described?
Yes, they can.
Okay. Your big problem with Dr. Johnson is that there was not the 101 personal contact. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is there a test that you learn in medical school, for example, to determine whether or not someone's malingering?
Well, there are a number of tests that I learned in my postgraduate forensic training that one adds to the multimodal approach to try to determine malingered symptoms.
How's malingering tested?
May I interrupt? Because you may understand the question. I want to make sure I do. Malingering for loss of memory, or malingering?
I think that's been the subject matter, Judge.
Okay. That's what you're hearing say.
Yes, Your Honor.
Here's
My
why I
apologies.
say it, because typically in my experience, I've come across malingering in the context of malingering symptoms of a mental illness, not necessarily dissociative amnesia. It's people acting like they're schizophrenic, trying to, and so on. So I'm trying to shift my perspective here and think of malingering today as malingering dissociative amnesia. So, pardon me, Mr. Mayor.
No, thank you, Your Honor, because you got into a question that's going to be asked, but I forgot my question now. Is that
Is there a
amnesia?
test for malingering dissociative amnesia?
Thank you. Is there?
There is a test, and it's part of an overall approach that involves a personal face-to-face evaluation.
What is the name of that test?
So you don't want to hear about the approach, you want to hear about the single test?
I want to know the name of the test that's utilized for making the determination.
Okay. The name of the test is the test of malingered memory. However, the determination isn't all made on the results of that test. It's made on the totality of one's evaluation.
Okay. What is it, based on your review of this case, what diagnosis was given to Officer Brelo that would cause him to be malingering?
Well, in my opinion, that's sort of part of the problem, is that I didn't see that where he was formally evaluated and any diagnosis was able to be given.
Okay. You're aware that Officer Brelo provided a couple of different statements to BCI, and you're aware of that, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Objection.
A statement to BCI?
Thank you.
You aware that he gave a couple of statements concerning this case?
Objection.
Based on,
So it's my understanding is that Officer Brelo gave one interview to BCI. And he hasn't even got a Garrity statement yet.
well, so far, we in this trial have evidence of only one,
Right.
December 10th, as I recall, 2014.
That's all my objections.
I think it's sort of known
Okay.
outside of trial that at least one other was given, but I trust that this witness probably hasn't reviewed that.
What Judge said was next, Garrity was next.
Oh, that's right.
Right.
Wasn't there? Oh, he just.
Is that-
Well, let me do this. How many statements by this defendant have you reviewed?
Your Honor, I've reviewed,
The December 10, 2012 statement to the Bureau of Criminal Investigation?
that's correct.
And you've looked at the video and looked at the transcript?
Correct.
Have you read anything else that he has said or is said to have said?
I don't believe so, but if I'm happy to look at it and to see if it'll refresh my recollection, but I don't believe so.
I'm not sure where you were going, Mr.
It's
Knapp.
not important
Basically, he
enough,
said,
Judge.
I've only seen the one statement.
Okay. When you talk about malingering, can you discuss the difference between poor effort, feigning symptoms, and malingering?
Sure. In a sense, it can all be considered under the umbrella of malingering. Some people will malinger by putting forth poor effort or not enough effort. In other words, they give if it's an IQ test, they'll underperform. So that's an example of poor effort.
Okay. How reliable is the method in terms of percentage of true cases versus false positive? Trying to make that determination.
Well, I mean, it depends on the type of literature you're looking at, but in terms of the test that I mentioned called the test of memory malingering, it's a widely accepted test that with good statistics behind it.
What statistics?
I couldn't quote them to you off the top of my head, but I could find you the references.
You have them?
Not offhand quickly.
Okay. You mentioned a couple of studies in your report. Are they studies that you are familiar with? You mentioned a study of 115 law enforcement officers who had been in a critical shooting incident, and 90% experienced one or more acute traumatic dissociative experiences.
Yes.
Okay. And is that something that you read about, or just tell us more about your knowledge of that?
That is, it was a study done by one of my colleagues, Park Dietz, participated in that study. It's a study that I'm familiar with, that has been discussed at numerous forensic conferences that I've attended, and we've studied it in terms of our work with the Syracuse police officers and in their training.
Okay. And what more can you tell us about that study in terms of, for example, you indicate 19% of the officers reported memory loss for some part of the incident. So that's about 1 out of every 5. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
Okay. And was there anything unique to those officers that reported memory loss?
Well, I think the important thing to note was that over time they were able to retrieve the memories that they had lost.
My question is, was there anything unique about those officers, the 20% that had memory loss? Anything different about those officers than the other 80%?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Is there anything that you can tell us based on your knowledge of the study about those 19% or 20% of officers that had memory loss?
Other than it's a relative minority, no, not off the top of my head right now.
Okay. Do you know what the cases involved in terms of shooting? Is that something that would have been made known to you?
You mean like the details of
The
each
details
case?
of, yes.
No, I'm not familiar with the details of each case.
Okay. Well, you cited it, so that's the reason why I'm asking, because I assume that you're comparing that study to what Officer Brelo went through in this case.
Well, I'm not comparing it. I'm using it because it's part of the research body that suggests people who go through critical incident shooting commonly experience these symptoms.
Okay. But is that the only, you just have it in here as something that's informational? Is that my understanding?
Right, and contextual, and to help the court have more information in the decision making.
Okay. So it is true that officers that go through traumatic experiences that involve shooting also suffer from memory loss as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And are you saying, based on your testimony, that every officer in these studies, in this limited study, always were able to retrieve that memory and remember what actually occurred, the information that they forgot?
That's the typical case, that most are able to retrieve memories.
You're saying the typical case. I'm asking you, are you saying that that's the case in all cases?
I'm sure there will be some cases where they will be permanently unable to retrieve that information for extensive periods of time, and I have seen such cases.
Okay. Tell us about those cases. Were those officer-involved shootings as well?
A few have been.
Okay.
But
is there a reason why you don't cite those in your report here?
yeah, they're just my personal clinical experience.
Okay.
So But what I did find, or at least in my clinical experience with those cases, is that there's more going on with those individuals than just that single trauma, that they usually have some pre-existing vulnerability, psychological vulnerability, such as childhood abuse or childhood trauma that sort of set them up for worse memory problems.
We can agree that Officer Brelo in this case does not report complete memory loss. Is that correct?
I didn't see any evidence of that in the
Okay.
records. Although I'd add that the delineation and the clarity of the nature of his memory loss and how it played over time still remains elusive in my opinion.
I'm not sure if I understand what you mean, sir.
Well, so over time, you know, how much exactly was lost? When did it come back? Did it come back? How did it come back? We don't know any of those details.
Okay. We can also agree that there's a difference between anger and a sudden fit of rage or passion, correct? You can be angry about something and not experience rage, correct?
Gosh, I hate to play semantics here, but
Well,
I think maybe you could make it more clear, because you know, anger can lead to. I'm taking rage as more overt, and so anger can lead into rage, and maybe it's a continuum, and so I'm not sure how to answer that question.
They're not synonymous, anger and rage necessarily, correct? You can be angry about something and not experience rage, correct? Have you ever been angry before?
Sure.
And do you always experience rage when you're angry?
Maybe you can define rage for me.
You don't want to answer the question, I see.
No, I honestly do. I just don't understand the question you're asking.
Did anyone bring it to your attention that audio experts testified in this case?
Yes.
Okay. And when were you made aware of that?
When I first received the materials that I reviewed.
Okay. All right. Are you aware of what their testimony has been in this case?
Not in any significant detail.
Okay. You mentioned that there was a study regarding 30% of violent offenders. You recall that?
Yes.
And what were you saying regarding that study?
So several studies in the literature that I reviewed suggest that about 30 to 40% of violent offenders claim amnesia for the offense.
Okay. Within that 30 to 40%, how many of those were police officers acting within the scope of their official duties?
That I don't know.
Doctor, you indicated that you reviewed Officer Brelo's, you saw the video of this interview, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And what is your recollection as it relates to whether or not he remembered being on the hood of the suspect vehicle or not?
That he did not remember it.
Okay. And do you recall what his response was when he was asked the question of whether or not he remembered?
Not verbatim, but it was something to the effect of I have no recollection of how I got, to the side of the driver's side.
Okay. It would be fair to say that he said that it was possible because he was so terrified that he was going to get ran over, but he doesn't recall?
Yes.
Okay. So he didn't just come out and deny it, correct?
My understanding is he says he has no recollection of it.
Okay. One moment, John.
Sure.
I have no further questions, John.
Thank you, Mr. Mack. Dr. Knoll, you sat through all or most of Dr. Johnson's testimony?
I sat through all of it, Your Honor.
During his testimony, he discussed concepts surrounding the body and mind's reaction to high stress, priming, potentiation, vasoconstriction, tunnel vision, other things. Without getting to commit one way or the other to everything he said, as a general proposition, did you find his discussion of these underlying concepts to be pretty accurate?
Yes, I did.
Your main, then, beef with him is he didn't do enough to determine whether these things actually did occur and play a role in altering Mr. Brelo's mindset.
Sort of. Can I clarify, Your Honor?
Please.
My concern is that he's given a very nice dissertation on the psychophysiological stress response, and of course this is going to be happening in all officers, but in addition to that, I want to know what else happened, because we know that that's not all that happens in a person's mind. And my understanding is that since we're concerned with the mental state at the time of the offense, I think that only takes us so far.
Sir, I thank you. We'll go off the record for one moment. Do you imagine much?
Judge, there is no need to redirect this individual.
Well, I will stay off the record for one moment. I asked a question or two. Do you envision any recross based on mine?
Nothing based on this.
All right, so we'll go back on the record. Sir, thank you. Mr. Gutierrez, do you have any redirect based upon what's been asked by Mr. Mack and me since you last inquired?
No need, Your Honor. Thank you.
Same question about recross, Mr. Mack. Any recross based on mine, given that there was no redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. Sir, appreciate you coming here today.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your excuse. So we're off the record. Why don't we resume at 5 till? I probably only have 35 minutes or so. This one I don't feel too guilty about because he wouldn't have been done in 2 hours anyway, right? Not at the rate we've been going. So.